So one of the biggest challenges for churches is getting people into small groups and then having effective small groups. And so today on Practical Church Planting, we're going to share with you 9 tips for effective small group leader guides.
Thanks for joining us again today on Practical Church Planting. My name is Brian Androsian, and joining me, which if you listen to this on the podcast and you don't watch the video, you are missing out because this is a once a year, probably at most,
once a year
event that you have to tune into because we have a mustachioed Dylan Dodson next to me.
That's right.
So tune in, see that mustache. Practical Church Planting on YouTube.
Here we go. Today, we're sharing 9 effective tips for small group leader guides. As always, at least recently, this episode is brought to you by the Church Co. Easter is coming up, so get a new church website before Easter. You can go to thechurchco.com/practical, and if you put in the word practical promo code at checkout, you get 40% off for 2 years. The best church building website software, in our opinion. We use them for our website and for Practical Church Planting. So thechurchco.com/practical, you can see tons of examples. It's super simple, and it is extremely cheap. $29 a month for 2 years if you use their promo code practical on their premium plan.
It's cheap, but worth a lot more than they charge. You get a lot for a very little amount of money.
So check them out and update your website before Easter. That would be good for you and for the people that are going to check out your website. Today, we're doing a highly practical thing of just how we do our small group leader guides. And you can take it or leave it, but it's how we do them. And we've been doing them for 5 years this way. It's worked out pretty well.
It does seem to work pretty well.
And so today, my mustache and it's great.
It's hard to take you seriously, but we will try.
Christina says I can't keep it for Sunday. So
you aged like 40 years overnight.
Yeah, really good. We're going to talk about this. So again, it's not right or wrong. It's just how we have done it, and we think it works very well, and it simplifies a lot of things. And so we're going to walk practically through how we do it, and then if you think what works for you, or you could take or leave it, whatever you want to do.
Yep.
So here are 9 tips for how we do it, how you can write and have effective small group leader guides, because I feel like this is a problem that a lot of churches struggle with. And trying to find a solution for, I should say.
Exactly. And I'll add, just like the Church Co., they're effective but easy small group leader guides. Like it's an effective way, but also it's a very uncomplicated way, in my opinion.
Yeah. So here we go. Number 1, the first 2 are kind of, I don't know. They're just, I don't know, statements, I guess. The last 7 are like how to actually do it. So here we go.
Tips.
Yeah. Number 1 is sermon-based is the easiest/most consistent. So we do sermon-based small groups. We call ours community groups. This episode is just called small groups because that's kind of like the universal thing. Yeah. It's the easiest and most consistent. Now, when I say easiest, I'm not necessarily talking about how to write them, which we will talk about that. And also, if you're in our Facebook group today, when this airs, we're going to post one of our recent community group leader guides just so you can see what it looks like.
Right.
So you can, if you're not in the Facebook group, Practical Church Planting on Facebook, join the group, but I'll post a PDF there so you can see what it looks like. But we do sermon-based, and so easiest in the sense of you know exactly what the groups are going to be doing, and it's super consistent because, especially if you're writing them every week, like you know what's being talked about. The group leaders know what to expect. They're not having to try to figure out who's doing what. And, some people like to go through books or something like that. And what I have found is a lot of groups, even group participants will say that, but then they won't do it because nobody wants to read a book and write down answers. Like nobody does that. And then they have to buy it, and then somebody has it, somebody doesn't. They forget it at home. Or making your group leaders try to figure out for themselves. I mean, some people like to do that, but the majority, I think, would just be like, hey, just tell me what to do. Because I have other things I got to do, and I'm happy to lead a group, but I don't want to spend hours trying to prep for it every week. And so we do sermon-based. I'm not saying they're the best. I don't necessarily think they're the best. I just think that they are the simplest and most consistent, which is why we do it at New City.
I think it's the easiest thing to plug people into because you don't have to, if someone wants to join a small group, you don't have to give them like a bunch of either options or a bunch of different ideas of this is what this group does, this is what this one does. It's just all of our groups do the same thing. They're all based off the sermon. So if you're either there on Sunday or you watch it, then you at least know what we're talking about. And then we just find a location and day of the week and maybe life stages that work for you. Yeah. But when groups are all doing their own thing, it can get really complicated and tough to think where to place people. And then you got to start thinking like, did this group finish that study that they were in? And are they moving to a next one? And I mean, everyone has good intentions and things, but sometimes group leaders aren't always the most communicative. And so they might finish something and move on to something else without letting you know. And there's just a lot of moving parts there that it can be done well. And I'm sure there's churches that do it really well. But I think especially if we're talking about church planting and starting from the beginning, this is a really easy, but not just easy, but really effective way to launch groups.
And people have flexibility, so sometimes groups have, I don't know, we'd call them like a social. You just hang out.
Mhm.
There's one group at our church who does the group leader guide 3 out of the 4 weeks, and the last week the men and the women like do their own study. They separate. They're like going through Romans or whatever, and like that's fine. It's once a week. It's not that big of a deal. They want to do it, but they're not trying to figure out every single week what to do.
Right.
And so some of our groups meet every week. Some of our groups meet every other week. But it's really easy for us to tell people, here's what we do. Now, if we have someone else in our church that wants to do something on their own, we certainly are happy for that. We talk about this a lot of episodes too about trying to be. You can't be all things to all people, and so we don't discourage that. We just won't necessarily promote it as one of our groups that you can sign up for.
Mhm.
I mean, they're absolutely welcome to tell people and invite people to join, but because it's not, our groups are you meet once or twice or once a week or every other week, have a meal or some sort of something like that, and then you do the group leader guide.
Yep.
That's what they are, and we can't give all these exclaimers or exclusions or whatever.
Yeah.
And so people want to do their own thing. That's fine. It's just not a church group. And again, we're not trying to be legalistic, and so like if you're a partner at New City, we ask that you join a group. If you were part of maybe more of a Bible study thing, that would be fine. Like,
Right. Yeah.
but that's just like a side thing. It's not the main thing that we kind of push people towards.
Yep.
So
Exactly.
sermon-based are the easiest in the sense of you know exactly what's happening and they're super consistent because you always know what you're doing instead of people trying to figure it out. Or even if all your groups are doing the same thing, you constantly trying to figure out
True.
what to do.
Yep.
So here's number 2. Another reason that they're effective is because people have already done their homework. So if they listen to the sermon or are there on Sunday, they already know and prepared and have something to say.
Yep.
Which the advantage of this over a book study or something like that is that people may feel like they don't know or don't have the right answers or aren't quite sure what the answers are to maybe the questions. But you can have an opinion on what you learned or what you heard or what you thought or if you had questions. And so there's already kind of you're already in the same direction. Now, again, we'll talk about writing guides in a second. We write ours in the way that if you're not there on Sunday, you can still participate because we know not everybody goes every Sunday, so that you should keep that in mind. But at least a handful, if not the majority of them, will have been there, and so there's a starting point for people to discuss, and for the leaders, they also, hopefully listen to the sermon. Again, not every single week, but most weeks, and so they also have some background behind what's going to be asked as opposed to here's a group leader guide, ask the questions and just see where it goes.
Yeah, and this I think it really gives people an opportunity to kind of explore the things they didn't understand from Sunday. Because a lot of times, I mean, hopefully if someone has a question or doesn't understand something, they'll contact you and ask. But most people won't. And so one thing we do in our group that we kind of learned from a group that we were in previously is we have our leader guide, but we also just ask questions about like what didn't make sense or what didn't you understand or what was hard to kind of process or doesn't kind of jive with what you understood previously. And there's been a lot of questions that come up, even things that are not like, pillars of salvation, but just like things like, oh, this is weird. I can't remember what the scripture was. We're in Mark, and it was a few weeks ago. I can't remember what we were talking about, but Jesus was a little less friendly in some of his.
Cut off your hands or you're going to hell?
No, it wasn't that. It was probably a couple months ago, but it wasn't anything that like, oh, was super shocking. But a few people were like, that was a little different. That was kind of I don't know, a little bit different than than the typical Jesus that we talk about. And it kind of allowed some of those questions to open up where if we're not doing sermon based, sure, other questions could come up, but these questions that they may have about the sermon, they may just kind of be left or forgot about and never really addressed. So this kind of gives another avenue for people to express their questions or concerns about the passage that we studied on Sunday.
Yeah. So again, it's consistent for them, and if they heard, they also have an avenue to discuss what they learned or talked about or have questions, which is really helpful as opposed to I don't know about that and I'll never ask anybody.
Yep, exactly.
And so that's really helpful. So those are the first 2. Sermon based is the easiest, and / by easiest we mean most consistent. You don't have to figure it out every week or every month or every season or whatever. And people have already have something to bring to the table because many of them will have heard the sermon, and some people will actually listen to the sermon before group because they know they're going to talk about it.
Yeah.
Whereas if you didn't do sermon based, they wouldn't even listen to it. So that has happened.
Yeah, that's true.
That's kind of a good thing. All right, so that's kind of the benefits of sermon-based and why we do them. Now, these are going to be very practically how we write them and how you can, again, on our Facebook group, Practical Church Planning, I'll have a PDF posted this morning or when this is live. If you were listening to this later, just search community group leader guide.
Yep.
It should come up as one of the attachments in the group. So here's what we do. We start with a couple of announcements. And so anything church-wide. Now, here's the thing with announcements. You always need to keep it typically like 3 months, maybe a month out at max. If you don't have a lot going on, maybe a month. But people like tune things out. They don't. As much as we like to assume, people don't put things on the calendar if they're more than a month out.
Yeah.
And so we share things that are relevant to the entire church. Of course, group leaders can share things that are just relevant to them if they want.
Mm-hmm.
So if we have an event coming up or something to sign up for or serving, or if there's a push we're doing, it's just typically it's 2 to 3 at most.
Yeah.
Really quick, bullet pointed. Here's the date. Here's what's coming up. If you have more information, want more information, you can email or ask your group leader. The group leaders will tell us. And so it's a nice way to help people keep people informed, and also helps people feel like they're in the know, which is good.
Mm-hmm.
Of here's some things coming up, because we do the once a week newsletter. You do the announce next steps on Sundays and social media stuff. But like the more points of contact you can get, the better.
Yeah.
And groups are a great way to do it because people are listening at the start of the group. And so we always start with just a couple of quick announcements at the beginning. You write these out. So, you want to keep them to like 2 or 3 sentences at max.
Yeah.
So you got to learn. The thing about the group leader guys, you've got to learn to be concise.
Yep.
And so you don't need all the information. They just need to know what's coming up, and they can follow up with more information, but you just want to get them, get it on the radar.
This is one of the only places where you can give people announcements and they have an opportunity to ask questions if they have them. Mm-hmm. Like if you have something coming up and they're like, well, are we supposed to bring anything? And that's not necessarily in the description, right. Or is it kid friendly, whatever, different kind of question that they may have that aren't in your little blurb about it. There's not many places unless they seek you out and ask, but that they can ask questions. So it kind of gives people an opportunity to ask if they want to ask. And like you said, it's just another touch point for getting announcements in people's ears.
So like for us right now in real time, we've got a trivia night coming up, which you do every once in a while. So It literally says something like trivia night, April 1st, 7 p.m. Yeah. And it's like board game trivia at the church. Invite your friends. That's like all it says.
Yeah.
And then we have our 5-year service coming up, April 3rd, come, it'll be great, whatever. And then we have baptisms coming up. Mm-hmm. You got questions about baptism, whatever. And so that's helpful, and people know it's coming up. And so you got to keep them concise. 2 sentences, 3 sentences at the most, because then people stop listening and your group leader doesn't want to read them.
Yep.
So you don't need to have all the information. It's just letting people know what's coming up. So start with group announcements on the group leader guide. So we do every week. The second thing in the format is we do icebreakers, which we didn't always do them.
Yeah.
I don't know why we started them, but they are fun.
They are.
And we've done, I personally would recommend, Brian, you can speak to how your group does it. I recommend doing 2. If you do more than 2, it could take a while.
Yeah.
Hopefully your group leader is also cognizant of the time. So a couple weeks ago, I forget what it was, but we had everyone in our group go around and answer the question. And so we didn't even do the second one because we just didn't have time. Yeah. So it's like, don't have to do it. But it's not, icebreaker is not like getting to know each other, although it is, but it's also just fun and funny. So it's like dumb stuff. Like, would you rather, I don't even know. I don't even know what we do. Like, would you rather this or that?
Would you rather?
Like a couple weeks ago, we did one. I was like, if you were a room in a house, which room would you be?
That was a confusing one for my group.
Or just random stuff that does not matter. Yep. Opinions, like a favorite childhood memory, or what'd you want to be when you were a kid? What was your favorite movie? I like to do sometimes where like to the person on your left or your right.
Yeah. A couple weeks ago, if the person to your left or whatever was a food, what would they be? And everyone's like.
But it was it funny?
It was very funny,
right.
And there's some good answers actually that came out of it.
So you're making people guess what their favorite meal is, if they're a food group or whatever. It's just funny. As the leaders, you got to make sure like, hey, you don't spend forever on this, like 10 minutes or whatever. But it's worth the time of people laughing and getting to know each other a little bit. Which again, a lot of times group leader guys just like, let's do the study. Yeah. And so it helps people. I don't know. Focus a little bit before you start talking.
It does, and it gives people it's for most of our groups we have a meal beforehand, so there's a chance to talk and stuff, but it gives people an opportunity to talk and share a little bit. Not that it's never anything serious, but people that may be a little bit more introverted.
Yeah,
like sometimes these questions can seem like they're for extroverts only, but what I've seen is a lot of times it kind of lets everyone come in. It kind of it breaks the ice. Like it allows people to get a little more comfortable just talking about stupid stuff. Yeah. Like in that food one, I was told by the person to my left, who's a big introvert, who does share sometimes, but he's a pretty major introvert, that he thinks of me as a potato or potatoes. And I was like, what? And he actually had he and here's why. I was like, that's actually really that's a good reason. But it kind of like, it was just like a funny thing and allowed it to be like, oh, okay, like relieve a little bit of, if not that there was any, but a little bit of like the tension that you can feel if you're not super comfortable sharing in a group. So they're good. Yeah.
And introvert or extrovert, people love to talk about themselves. So especially if it's like an opinion, it's just fun. So Icebreakers, I just Googled them. I'm the one that writes our guides most weeks because I do the sermons most weeks. So I just like Google Icebreakers and just pick 2 and put them on there.
The ones that I found, or the ones that I've thought would be the dumbest, or like the ones that maybe not dumbest, but like that would get no engagement or answers. And I've actually said this, like, I don't think anyone's gonna have an answer for this, but I'll read it. Are the ones that people are the most interested in.
You gotta trust me, bro.
I gotta trust the process. But 2 is good because at least in our group, it typically one question generally gets a couple answers and the other gets a lot more. I don't know why, but it's a good way to start, and it's a good way just to, from there we just roll into open the Bible and start reading, you know, and it's a good way to start. Yeah,
depending on how you do groups, again, for us, most people share a meal and they do the discussion. It's just a good transition point of like, okay, now we're done. We're going to start talking. And yeah, people just get used to it. One of the guys in my group loves them. His favorite part of group is the Icebreakers. So.
I don't know if do you guys do the Icebreakers during the meal or after?
After.
Okay, so do we. So and it like you said, it is a good transition because sometimes it can be, we move from, at least in our place, the table where we eat to the living room where we talk. And sometimes it can be kind of like, we're still talking and still laughing or whatever. And it's kind of awkward to be like, all right, everyone quiet and open to Mark, Right. So it gives like people are still kind of talking amongst themselves a little transition time to jump in.
Yeah. So start with announcements, do some icebreakers. And then when it comes to the actual, material, we recommend breaking up the text into multiple sections with a couple of questions and a brief description. So let me explain what that means. Say it again and I'll explain it. Break up the text into multiple sections with a couple of questions for each section and a brief description. So again, this is just one of those things you just need to check out our Facebook group to see it. If you're not on Facebook, just send us an email through the Practical Planting website and we can send you the PDF. How it typically is I don't know why, I like to do 3 sections. It doesn't have to always be 3 sections. And depending on your text, that can make it more difficult, whatever. But typically, if you're doing, I don't know, a section in Mark, because we're going through Mark right now, I'll try to break it up. Even if my sermon notes and points weren't like broken up into 3, it's concise sections in the sermon. I still do that for the community group leader guide because again, it's an overview. It doesn't need to have all your notes and all your sort of things. And so what I'll try to do is a couple verses, then a brief description. Again, this is part of the problem with leader guides, especially if you like Google like Bible studies and stuff like that. It's like they got all this information that people they're not going to listen.
Yeah.
So like 2 to 3 sentences summarizing those verses. Now there's going to be stuff that you don't say. Again, this is the benefit of a sermon base. So like some of the people might have context. There might be times in there where there'll be like a little bracket, if you have questions, you should listen to the sermon, whatever.
Yeah.
But like just 2 to 3 sentences. I mean, that's it about what they just read. And then typically like to do like 2 questions. Mm-hmm. So for us, it's typically broken up into 3 sections with 2 questions each, which is typically 6 or 7 questions is typically what we do. So a few verses in Mark, that's where we're in right now, a brief description, 2 questions. And then we're going to read some more verses, a brief description, 2 questions. And then a couple more verses, a brief description, 2 questions. Mm-hmm. And if you do like multiple passages, like, sometimes we'll have a verse here, a verse there outside of Mark, you can also tell them to read that as well.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does.
How I'm explaining this.
I mean, it doesn't line up perfectly with how we preach it, but it's kind of like if you're preaching, like we don't typically do this, but sometimes people read like the entire passage at the beginning of the message, but then you're still going through and like reading a section, explaining it, reading a section. And so that's exactly what we're doing. It's a section, a super brief. Like if you think you're being brief, be even briefer. Like super brief. This is just a little bit what's happening here, and then questions about it, and then we go to the next section, and it's like it's very, I don't know, logical the way.
Yeah, and it's really helpful. I mean, you can read the whole passage beforehand if you want to, but breaking it up when you talk about it is helpful because people kind of forget.
Yeah,
they kind of tune out. So it's like, let's read a couple verses and let's talk about it. We'll talk about the type of questions after this, so I won't get into there. But yeah, so text questions, text questions, text questions, and then at the very end, we also typically include like our bottom line point. Oh, yeah. So like the last section, there's typically 2 questions, and normally there's a question, like the main point, and then one more question that has to do with the main point. And again, like Brian said, typically does not flow with the same how it was broken up on Sundays.
Yeah,
you might break up and explain more verses or chunk them differently than the group leader guide, but it's about having a smooth process that people can read and understand. And when we write the questions too, sometimes we put like little brackets of like, hey, you can ask this a different way, or depending on what's happening in your group, you might want to avoid this question or whatever, or just stuff like that. So like the people that know that are leading the group, they know they have flexibility. Yeah. But that's how we write the guide structurally.
And we'll get into like what the questions are in a second, but I think it's really helpful to have 2 questions for each section, because not every question is going to get many answers. And so it can be awkward to like read a section, explain it, ask one question, there's very little response to it, and then okay, let's go back into Mark, So 2 gives at least a little bit of a buffer or something like that if one question doesn't really get a lot of response or people don't engage with it super well, you have something else to ask as well before you jump back in, and it doesn't feel awkward just jumping in and out.
Yep. So that's how we do it. We break it up. You don't have to do 3 sections. You can do 2 or 4 or whatever. Yeah. The problem is if you start asking too many questions, it'll take forever. Now we tell our people that our leaders that they don't have to go through all the questions.
Yeah.
But we try to structure it so like you have about 45 minutes of talking. If all you do is read them and go through the questions, you have at least 45 minutes of like a good discussion.
Yep.
And so that's what we aim for. And so we don't ask every question there is to ask. It's just enough to get them going. Of course, people can ask their own questions as well too. Mm-hmm. That's fine as well. Yep. The point though is that we don't want to make our group leaders spend an hour prepping. Ideally they look at the group leader guide before the group starts, but that's all they have to do, just to know what they're going to ask.
Yeah.
And it just takes, it also makes, I think, finding group leaders a lot easier, because they know that they're going to be given exactly what to do, and they don't have to figure it out on their own.
Yep.
So break the text up into multiple sections with a couple of questions and a brief description. Number, I don't know what this is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? 6. For the questions, include questions about life and experiences, not just the Bible and theology. So what can be tempting here is to be like, what does Jesus want us to do with this text?
Yeah.
It's like, fine, you can answer that. You can ask that. But life and experiences are really important, because, again, it's not just a Bible study. It's community of getting people to know one another. Mm-hmm. So we will ask questions like, let's say the text is on forgiveness. Mm-hmm. We might ask a question of, when was there a time in your life where somebody went out of their way to forgive you, or something like that. Yeah. Or maybe a time in life you had to forgive somebody, something like that. Well, it's relevant to what's being talked about, but it's about their life and their experience, so that people can share their life and get to know one another. And it actually provides for a good discussion. Like for me, when I write the guides, if I do 6 or 7 questions and they're all about the Bible and the text, I'm like, this isn't good. This is not a good guide.
Yeah.
I try to always include 1 or 2 of what's been your experience, or how have you seen this, or have Jesus is going to be betrayed here shortly in Mark. I don't know. Have you ever been betrayed? And it doesn't have to be like a spiritual answer. It's just a life answer to get people kind of emotionally connected with what's going on. And so that's one of the problems in my experience with Bible study leader guides in general, is it's just on the text itself, which of course you want to talk about that, but you want people to get to know one another and open up. And these questions are an easy way to do that.
And I think it really helps challenge people too. Like if you're just talking about what does the text say, what does Jesus want us to do with this, then we can talk a lot about what we should be doing, but there's very little of, have you actually done it? And so talking about something like forgiveness, or if it's something, I don't know, just like on a basic level, like talking to your neighbor or meeting your neighbor, something like that. If we're just talking about, yes, that's a good thing to do, but then we never talk about, okay, have we actually done it? But then we've asked that question, like, when have you actually done this thing? If no one has an answer, then you can kind of talk about like, well, that's probably an issue for all of us. If none of us can think of a time we've done this, then maybe we need to think about what we can do about it, or how we can be challenged to do this thing. But if we're just talking about kind of theoretical of what should we do with this text, or what should we do in the future instead of what have we done in the past, then we can, I think, leave thinking that was good. I know what to do and stuff, but do we actually do it, and kind of go from there. And so I think it really helps challenge people as well.
Yeah. Oftentimes when we read the Bible, listen to sermons, whatever, we love to think of theory, like, oh, it's good to love people, it's good to forgive. And so the questions, we try to make them practical. For example, what is, recently we talked about Jesus was talking about being great in the kingdom of God. First will be last, serving people, whatever. Yep. So one of the questions is, what is one practical thing you can do this week to be great? Mm-hmm. And having people answer. You don't have to go, not everyone has to answer, but having people say, oh, I can do this thing for this person. Or this past week, when was a time I didn't live out what we read? Yeah. But not letting people say, what do you think we should do? But what should you do? And even writing the questions like practically for you, what would it look like for you to do that this week? What would it look like for you who do you need to forgive this week if it's on forgiveness, or what does it look like for you to be generous this week, or whatever it is? Not just saying the theoretical. How should we apply this? But making them really practical so that people have to think about what they're actually going to do, not just the good ideas of it.
And I think especially if it's a really practical question. I mean, there's been times because I didn't want people to go down that road that you can even word it, and this is kind of like more for your leaders to like in brackets or something. But like this isn't meant to be this like give a specific example, not like I should be better at forgiving, but like who by name do you need to forgive now? And so like we need to talk about what's actually happening in our lives, not just these ideas that we think are good but don't actually live out. And these questions really help do that.
So include questions about life and experiences, not just Bible and theology. It's okay if some of them have very little to do with the text.
Yeah.
It's just about community and letting people know one another. And so, again, it's about generosity. When was a time that somebody, went out of their way to do something really kind for you?
Yeah.
It's just, it's cool to hear people's stories.
So. And like at the end of the day, it's just like your hopefully it's just like your sermon. Like it's great if people walk away with a ton of Bible knowledge. That's cool. But like if they're not doing anything with it, then what's the point? And so that's kind of the idea behind these guides is, we want people to grow in their knowledge some. Like we want people to understand the Bible a little bit more as they're reading it. But in reality, we want people to live it out. And so if all the questions are just based around what did you understand from this, or what does this mean, then I think people are really missing that aspect of living it out in their own lives.
So that's one of the big problems with Bible study guides that I read and come across and look up, is that they're just about Bible and theology, and it can become kind of dry and stale, and it can be like, well, if I don't know the correct answer, I'm not going to say anything. Where people can share their life experience. It's not right or wrong, it just is.
Yeah.
And so include questions about life and experiences, not just Bible and theology. Here's another tip. This is a big problem with a lot of, and maybe you've tried some sermon-based stuff and you're not exactly sure how to do it. Maybe you fall into this trap, is that you want to avoid inductive Bible study questions. What that means is, and if you Google, because sometimes, I'm like, I don't even know what to ask about this text. And so I'll try to Google, like, mark the text on small group questions, and it never works.
Yeah.
It never works. Because it's all, what does the text say? So what did Mark say in verse 35? Or it's just like it's like yes or no, right or wrong, very obvious answers. Like you read verse 35 and that's your answer. You read verse 32 and that's your answer. And that is not helpful for a discussion. It's helpful if you're going to take a test on the passage.
Yeah.
And so what you see very often is inductive Bible studies. It's like, what does it say in verse 31? Which disciple betrayed Jesus? If you're talking, it's it's just not helpful. And even if everyone knows the answer, it's like you're done.
Yep.
And so the hardest part about writing group guides is to think about life experience questions and to think about Bible theology questions that people can discuss, and they don't just say yes or no. And so that's a big problem. Recently, at our last elder meeting, actually, I was very proud of this moment, Dave mentioned how he has traditionally not liked, group leader guides based off sermon-based small groups.
Yeah.
And I forget exactly how he phrased it, but that was essentially the point. And then he said something to the effect of, but he really likes how we do them here. And I didn't say anything, but I was like, I know the answer to that is because you are used to inductive Bible studies, where it's like very dry, very yes or no, read the verse, tell me the answer. Because that's easier to do. It's a lot harder to do it. And I've been writing these things for a very long time, so I've gotten a lot quicker at it. But it does take some practice to think about and to ask questions that there still might be a right answer. Like, what does Jesus want us to do with this text? That might be like, but like, what is one thing you can do, with this text this week? That's a better question. And so, again, inductive is just, what does the verse say? What are we supposed to do? Those are boring, dry, they can be answered. And once one person answers it, it's like, all right, we're done.
Yep.
That's what you want to avoid. I don't know how helpful that is. Again, so I would point back to just check out our Facebook group on the post this morning. If you're listening to this in real time, or just search it after the fact of how we do them. They're not perfect. It's just, you want to ask questions that people can discuss, not just, what does verse 32 say?
And that's exactly it. Like every question needs to lead or have the goal of leading to a discussion or a conversation. Honestly, like if you get through half of the guide, as long as your people aren't going off topic and kind of like, or dominating the conversation and rambling or whatever, that can be fine. Like it doesn't need to be, you don't have to get through every single thing if actual discussion is happening. But if you have questions that just have an answer, or like even if it's if you know that everyone's going to give probably the same response, or there's like a general church response to give that we know is the right response, then avoid that question. There's a Bible study I went through recently, and obviously I won't like name the author or anything, but that I wanted to get, and I just on my own because I had a lot of good reviews. It's a book of the Bible I want to study, whatever. And so I don't typically get like Bible studies, but I got this one, and it was a lot of questions like this, and it was really disappointing because it was a lot of like read it, and then it was like a book, but it was like fill in the blank, whatever. And it was like, what did the author of the book like say in this section, and what did they say here? And it's like, well, I mean, I can fill it in, and maybe it'll help me remember it a little bit more. But I wasn't trying to do like a homework related to it. Like I want to learn more about it, and so I think those things can really it like you said, it can just lead to like one word answers or one person answering, and everyone just kind of nodding along. And it seems like we made it through fine, but no one's actually growing any further in their faith.
I mean, the test is when you write out a question, if somebody answers it, is there anything else to be said? And if there's nothing else to be said, that's probably not a good question because it's not a good discussion.
Yeah.
So,
and I think like if you write a question and and you can think of one answer to it, then that's probably a sign that it's not good. Like if it's a question and well, the answer should be this, and hopefully they say this, then that means that there's probably not going to be much conversation that comes of it. But if people can relate it to their own lives and bring their own experience in, then it probably means that it's going to work out.
Yeah. So a bad question is, should we be generous with our resources? Like that's a bad question.
Yes.
A good question is, what does it look like to be in your seasons of life to be generous with what God has given you? Like that's a good question.
Yep.
Now one of the, again, it's tricky. You learn over time. The thing you have to avoid is that if the answers to the questions make people look good, they will not want to answer them. And so sometimes you do need to ask them anyway and say, hey, when was the time you did this? Because it's helpful for people to learn.
Yeah.
But you need to be clear, and those need to be rare. So if it's a question of like, when was the time that you went out of your way to forgive somebody? I don't know how I phrased it earlier. That could be helpful, or it could like maybe look really good. Yeah. Or maybe that's not the best one. Maybe it's like, when was the time that you extravagantly generous with your money? Like that's not, no one's going to answer that. And so a question like in those situations might be better. The reverse is like, when was someone extravagantly generous to you? You'll get answers for that. And so, just so be cognizant of it. If answering the question makes them look really good, people will not want to avoid that. We'll avoid answering that question. So,
and like you said, if there's a question that you want to include that could make them potentially look good, but it's something you feel like you need to ask, like, I don't have a specific example, but I think there are times like we need to be more comfortable sharing like what we're doing with our faith. And so even if it's a good thing, but maybe have that be the only question in the guide, like not have a bunch of those, but one, and then maybe follow it up with something that's a little more challenging. So it's not just, talk about yourself. But there's a little bit of a balance of both.
Yep. So avoid inductive Bible study questions. Number 8, we mentioned this a little bit, but mention it again because it's the point now, is to keep it to 6 to 8 questions. So that's the kind of the ideal. You want to, an hour or less of discussion. I mean, for us, for our group, a lot of groups probably like this. We share a meal. We try to be really cognizant of ending on time. I don't know how everyone does that, but at least we tell people to. And so we'll like do the meal for like 45 minutes, an hour, and that leaves us an hour. So we'll do the discussion for about 45 minutes, and then we split. And the men and the women will split for 15 minutes and do the prayer requests, which just a side note, this is not a point here. People are like, why do you do this? And it works really well. We split guys and girls, and guys stereotypically sometimes are like giving prayer requests is like pulling teeth. Here's what we do in our group. I'm not saying it's right, but I'm saying you could try it. It helps us get on time. We have 5 or 6 guys in our group. I set a timer for 2 or 3 minutes, depending on how many people are there, and that's how long you have to share.
Really? I haven't tried that.
That ensures that everybody gets to talk, because what will happen is 2 or 3 people will talk, and then time's over, and nobody means to go over, but they always do. And it's typically the same people never get to share. And so we do. It sounds bad, but everyone gets to talk. Now, if there's a problem, obviously you stop it. But everybody gets to talk. I let the thing beep so that everyone hears it, and so but that allows us to be done. And the girls in our group are not as good at that. But then Christina, my wife, last week implemented it. She's like, I can't do it. But what was happening is literally only half. They would go for like 30 minutes. And that was fine. Everybody was like fine staying. One couple always left at 8:30 because they're kids. But I was part of the problem. I was like, so she shares, but then she doesn't get to hear everyone else.
Yeah.
And then Christina's like, but she also shares really long, even though she has to leave. And so anyway, they've now implemented the timer as well.
Yeah, there you go.
I don't know why I'm talking about that. That's just a help way to get things done. But anyways, for the group leader guide, the questions, you don't want to ask a million of them. And so what you could do is like maybe you mix in some inductive Bible study questions with regular ones just because you're trying to get a lot of questions in. Like that's just not helpful.
Yeah.
And so try to think of 6 to 8 good questions. It's totally fine if your people don't get through the whole guide because you're still saved your group leader a bunch of prep work and they had a good discussion, hopefully. But that's what we do is try to keep it to 6 to 8 questions.
It's funny throughout we've done this. We haven't changed our like group leader guides drastically pretty much since the beginning.
Yeah.
Like we've done very similar throughout the entire time.
Yeah.
And throughout the life of New City, I've been in, I want to say, I guess 4 different groups. Like there was, when we first started, there was one group that you guys led. But then because of moving and stuff, we've been in a few different ones, and we lead one now. And so there's been different people leading it, and the same amount of questions has always. Like even it doesn't, regardless of who's leading it, different people have different styles of how they ask questions and things. The timing wise, it's always worked out fine. Like I can't think of any group I've been in where it's like, man, we either fly through them because they don't ask any deeper questions or anything like that, or we only get through 2 questions because people are just talking. Like it's always worked out pretty well. And even now that I'm leading it, like I'll read through them, and there's been times I read through them, like, I don't know if we'll get, I feel like this might end kind of quick, because, like, some of these, I know our group, I don't know that they may not answer them, but even still, like, the earliest I think we've ever ended is, like, I don't know, 10 minutes before, like, group needs to end, and then we just pray, and so, like, there's never been, it's always worked out really well, magically, by the grace of God, whatever, but, like, I think this amount of questions, 6 to 8 questions, has really, been a good format for a group for 5 years now.
Yeah, well, I think partially what's helpful too when you're writing guides is they need to be consistent.
Yeah.
So if one time you have 5 questions, the next time you have 10, like the group leader doesn't know how quickly to ask, how much time to give, and so whatever number you land on, you just want to be consistent. And fewer questions allows people to, I think, talk a little bit more. And if they want to talk about other things, or the group leader wants to ask questions, there's flexibility to do that without like if you only give them 4, it's like, okay, the group leader is going to have to come up with something every week, or you're going to run out of time and they're going to feel bad or whatever. Yeah. So it seems to be a good number for us.
And one of the things we want to make sure is that anyone, and how do I put this? Anyone can, not everyone should be, but just about anyone, regardless of their knowledge level, could lead a group.
Yeah.
Obviously, like, there may be other things that we decide they're not the best fit for a group leader, but anyone should be able to. And so if we only put a few questions in, then that's going to rule out anyone who's uncomfortable writing their own questions, or who is maybe a little more timid,
or feels
whatever.
like they don't know enough about the Bible,
or feels like they don't know enough. And so this amount of questions really helps get you through. And if you truck through them all, and then cool. And if you don't, then that's cool too. But it kind of relieves a little bit of the pressure from the group leader guide to have to come up with their own stuff if they don't want to.
Yeah, because and how we structure them, a community group leader, small group leader is more of is a leader because they're like running the group. But when it comes to actually the group time itself, they're really just a facilitator.
Yeah.
And it makes it a lot easier. More people are likely to sign up. Again, they know what to expect. And so that's just been really helpful for us. So 6 to 8 questions, and you give them what to ask, and that's how you do it.
Yep.
And then last but not least, something that's also very helpful, and goes with planning, which we'd like to plan. We talk a lot about planning here, and everyone's fine. Last week I was at this pastor's gathering and there was a well-known pastor that came and spoke at it, and he talked about sermon prep, and one of the things that I just heavily encourage is getting ahead.
Yeah.
Even just 1 week. Like, it doesn't have to be. And he was like, yeah, I mean, he doesn't get ahead. And he talks about how he does it Wednesdays and Thursdays or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, that's fine. If it works for you, it's fine.
Yeah.
One of the reasons he said was because he's like, I need to be in the text. So I was like, well, you can be in the text because I'm in the text Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday of the week of. Anyway, this goes with this question, this thing, because you can't really do this if you're last minute with your sermon prep. And that is to send them out before Sunday.
Yes.
Sending them out before Sunday. If you're writing your sermon Thursday, Friday, Saturday, writing the group leader guide, trying to get it out, it can be a mess. And so if you get ahead, even if you're just 1 week ahead, or even if you're not ahead on sermon prep, but like you have a good deadline, like Thursday at noon is when my sermon is written and finished. And I mean, you can tweak it or whatever if you want, but like it's done. That would be a good goal in order to consistently get group leader guides out to people that they know what to expect. You never miss a day. If you send them out a day later, it's Friday. We send ours out on Thursday.
Yep.
If you send it out on Friday, it doesn't matter. Like it's going to be sent out. If you have groups that meet on Sunday and you don't send it out till Monday, or you send it out right before their group, it kind of just shows that it's devaluing. Even though we know our group leaders aren't like spending an hour going over the group leader guide, nor do we want to. The fact that you send it out right before the first group meets just shows like, hey, we don't really have our stuff together.
Yep.
And so sending them out before Sunday is just really helpful.
It's like it's like anything that we do. Just pick a day and do it. Honestly, and so Thursday works really well for us because that's typically our last in office work day of the week. You know, we may do some stuff Friday and Saturday, but it's usually not here. And so it's the last day we're here, and so everything's got to be written by then, obviously for you.
Yeah.
And so that means it's going to be sent out then. And it's just, and not that Thursday is the perfect day. Pick whatever day you want, but make it before Sunday and just pick it and stick to it, unless something drastic makes you need to change. But it makes life and planning and like taking some thought out of some of these things just makes things much simpler. So if you just have it on your schedule every week, it's going to be done at this time on this day, then just do it. And you don't have to start thinking about like, did I remember to do it? Did I not remember to do it? Or should I do it tomorrow or today? It's just do it that day, do it that time, and it's done.
Everything has a deadline, and 10:30 p.m. on a Saturday night is not more holy than Thursday at 12. Like, it's just not. Yep. You just say, here's when it's going to be done. Yep. Now, I actually write hours on Tuesday. Before I'm like 100% done with the sermon. So we've talked about my process. I'm not going to get into it here, but I'm ahead. And so on Monday mornings, I'll typically write out the notes on the actual text itself, because that's what I bring with me, and whatever, from my study, whatever. And then Tuesday, I'll go over it out loud and, kind of clean up my outline. And then after Tuesday morning, after I do that, I will write the community group leader guide. And then I'll go over it again on Thursday, and I might tweak some notes here and there. But like nothing really changed. Like the sermon itself isn't changing. So even if I change a point or reword a point on a Thursday morning, well, my points aren't really part of the group leader guide.
Right.
Sometimes I'll use one of my points and turn them into a question, but that doesn't really affect that. So like if I'm tweaking the flow or transition, or I'm adding a story or something on a Thursday, if I happen to do that, it doesn't really affect the guide, because the guide is just on the text with questions. And so you don't even have to be necessarily, depending on how you do your sermon prep, but you don't necessarily have to be 100% done before you write them. And it's really helpful because, Brian's over our group, so he sends them out on Thursday. And if you ever want to get to the place where you're not doing everything and you want someone like to have be over groups, for example, it's just really helpful for them that they're also not scrambling, because it can make them look bad, even if it's not their fault, if they don't have the stuff to send out. And so, part of it is it's not just you. So if you have a team and you have staff, considering other people. But I write them, Brian sends them out, and because they're ahead of time, there's never a worry or a wonder of like where are they at and how we're going to get them to people on time.
No, that's a good point, and it helps to not have to. There doesn't have to be any back and forth of like, is it done yet? Can I send it yet? No, hang on, wait a little bit, and it changes each week, because by when I do it, which is Thursday afternoon, it's done by then, and it's never. I mean, I know if for some reason it wasn't, you would tell me, but that's never happened. Like it's just done by then. And it's similar to, we do a little notes handout thing in our service. That has like fill in the blanks for people to have while they're listening. And it's the same thing. Like I know after this time on Thursday, it'll be done. And so it takes out a lot of like, especially if you don't have if maybe you have people working a little bit more remote or something like that, you don't have to be emailing back and forth or texting and bugging each other saying, is it done yet? Can I do it? Whatever. It's just by this time, it's going to be done. If not, obviously communicate, but the majority of the time, it should just be done when you say it'll be done. And it makes life and, things for your staff a lot simpler to not have to always be bugging you with questions.
It's really helpful not to live your life around in case of emergencies. So what I mean by that is like, even stuff with our phones, it's like people check their email all the time because someone might email me, or they check their text all the time, or their phone because someone might call me. And it's like you're living your life based on the 1% emergency that hardly ever happens. And if it does, that would stink, but it wouldn't. Most of the time, it's not the end of the world.
Right.
And so what I mean by that is, when it comes to like the sermon stuff and like that. So like Brian on Thursday, he will print out our handouts that we give people. So all the screen points on a Sunday morning have fill in the blank notes. There is a chance on a Saturday night or a Sunday morning or whatever, but after Thursday, that I'm thinking about, I want to change how I word this.
Sure. Yeah.
And so what we could do is we could always wait till Sunday morning to print them in case that happens. Well, that very rarely ever happens, and it saves us a lot of time. If it does happen, we reprint it.
Yeah.
And
life goes on.
You printed 2 times as many notes, you wasted some ink, whatever. That I don't even know the last time that happened.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Maybe once in the past 2 years.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's been very rare. But all I had to say is like some of the stuff, like the community group leader guide, or if you print notes, you might want to wait till the last second in case something changes. But if things don't change, plan your life in a way, how you do stuff in a way that's not going to stress you out. And in the event that something changes, you just, do it a little bit more work that one time, but generally speaking, it makes everyone else, feel a lot better.
Yep.
So
Exactly.
send them out before Sunday. Could be helpful as well. So those are 9 tips for effective small group leader guides. We're not saying they're the best, but that's how we do it. It's really consistent. Again, join our Facebook group so you can see if you want to see like a practical example, and you'll be like, oh, this is really basic.
Yeah.
And that's the point. You can definitely do it. I'll say it takes time. So some of the group guides you send out are going to be better than others based on the text. So it can be more difficult, or your questions were just better. That's fine. But the only way to get better at it is by doing it. And so don't worry about it not being amazing the first couple times. It'll take a while.
Yep.
So
exactly.
Those are 9 tips for effective small group leader guides. Again, check the Facebook group out for more information. If you want to update your website, thechurchcode.com/practical. I put practical at the promo code, whether you sign up then or any time you sign up. Just always make sure you put practical promo code because you will get 40% off for 2 years. And you can go to practicalplanting.com as well for more resources and stuff like that. So thanks for being with us. We will be with you next week without a mustache.
Without a mustache.
On Practical Church Planting.